It's no secret that there's a culture war going on right now, and the intentionally divisive nature of a lot of modern media is contributing to it. Many forms of popular media are being co-opted and changed in order to fit more in line with the ideas of certain groups. Well-known comic book characters from franchises are retired or have their races changed to make way for more diversity in their fictional universes. All-female remakes have started to become a trend. Huge franchises like Star Wars have taken it upon themselves to be more inclusive and openly pat themselves on the back for how progressive they are. Whether you agree with these changes or not, it would be impossible to say that they have come without conflict. Perhaps the first major backlash to progressive forces changing popular culture was Gamergate. While the movement has lost its relevancy and has basically become a punchline at this point, the problems Gamergate initially attempted to combat are not only still around, they're stronger than ever. It's plain to see that collusion between news sources and the media companies they cover is ubiquitous at this point. All you have to do is pay attention and you'll see a myriad of articles from all over major news sites with nearly identical headlines, almost like someone sent out a memo on what the narrative is supposed to be. The organized and weaponized ability of news sources to create a narrative is perhaps one of the most dangerous developments of the last century.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 And demonstrates a lack of integrity and contempt for the truth that I personally find disgusting. I could very easily go on for hours about how the media constantly lies and misrepresents facts in order to push their own agenda, no matter what side of the aisle they're on. Or how bombarding an all too unquestioning populace with a false narrative is almost a low-key form of brainwashing at this point. But instead, I want to focus on just one brick in this wall of lies, and that is outrage marketing. Outrage marketing is the newest hip trend in Hollywood, and has proven itself to be a surefire way to get your movie talked about. The technique is to find some way to virtue signal through your new movie or TV show, and then weaponize your wall of media against fans that react negatively, while making yourself the victim. There doesn't actually need to be any real virtue signaling in the product itself. Just drum up some fake news story on an offhand comment from some co-writer. Hell, the media's gotten so good at playing the victim that they don't even need to be attacked anymore. When Black Panther came out, Rotten Tomatoes censored negative user reviews because of an alleged racist plan to tank reviews for the film. A plan that came from a Facebook group that specifically cited Disney's corporate manipulation and bad press about DCEU movies as their reason. Outrage marketing basically hinges on two things: having news sites that will celebrate your accomplishments towards progressing the right side of history, and a small group of existing fans that will react negatively to your decision. Although, as we have seen, this is optional. By basing your movie around a diverse cast, feminism, or non-heteronormative themes, you've given yourself the ability to call your detractors racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic, and any other synonym for bigot. The most important part of this is to levy these charges against every single detractor, no matter how reasoned or calm their criticism is. Humongous plot holes, garbage writing, plot lines that don't go anywhere, a complete abandonment of all established lore and a refusal to explain any new material, awkward, unfunny comedy, bland, unlikable main characters, anticlimaxes, and a borderline malicious character assassination of one of the greatest optimistic heroes in the history of cinema? All meaningless. You can just say that anyone who doesn't like your movie hates it because they're afraid of women. That's a key part too. You have to say they're afraid of women. It makes them sound weak. Bonus point if you can call them man babies or imply they're over 300 pounds living in their mother's basement.
Yeah, baby. But then what they don't say when they're typing is that, like, 1 minute after they type that, their mom's like, get upstairs and take out the garbage. You're 45 years old.
I think you're probably more right than even people would believe.
Yes.
Remember, fat shaming is only bad when someone else is doing it. The important part of this is to recognize that you have an impenetrable shield that you can throw up no matter what the criticism is that comes your way. All you have to do is call someone a bigot and suddenly every naysayer is a Nazi who should be deplatformed. I want to make it clear that I'm not saying actual harassment doesn't happen. It does. Leslie Jones having people send pictures of gorillas to her on Twitter until she had to shut down her account, that was real harassment, and that is terrible. But what I'm saying is that people who exploit that pain and use it as a tool for their own gains are despicable. And that the people that are doing that are a comparatively small number and don't represent the entirety of a movie's detractors. Red Letter Media did a great video on this, breaking down the math of the number of sexist comments made on the legendarily disliked Lady Ghostbusters trailer versus how many views and dislikes the trailer had, and I recommend you check it out if you haven't already seen it. The benefit of outrage marketing from a money standpoint ideally comes in two forms. The first is greater media attention. This is by far the greatest and most visible benefit of outrage marketing. People will literally talk about your property for months, hell, years, if you can do this properly. The Last Jedi has been a topic of conversation for over a year, and it still has articles coming out every now and then because J.J. Abrams has made a comment about man babies, or somebody says that Solo's failure proves that audiences are sick of white men and want the diverse cast of the higher-grossing sequel films. As the saying goes, any publicity is good publicity. And while I might not totally agree with that, when it comes to a movie, it's a lot better for people to be talking about it than not. The sheer amount of free press that a film can get simply by having one of its actors get attacked on Twitter is such a bargain, you certainly won't regret sacrificing said actor's mental health to get it. These articles also act as a defense force against criticism, driving up reviews or outright demanding that people see your movie out of a moral responsibility to their beliefs. Which leads me to the second advantage of outrage marketing, which is an expected increase in viewer attendance due to controversy. Controversy breeds interest, and can make someone decide to see a shitty, middle-of-the-road comedy full of annoying line-o-rama and unfunny jokes about wontons just to see what all the fuss is about. People in the ideological camp will attend this film with gusto, and maybe even see it twice, just to really support the cause. And the angry fans who get shit on, who threaten boycotts, who complained on Twitter, they'll go hate watch it so they can write a long, angry blog post about how bad it was. And so the end result is that the film is a massive success, and we can all make a giant shared universe and create a whole new division of our studio, and we'll be printing money for years. Right? Well, not exactly. Despite its marketing campaigns, constant press, and moral high horse, Lady Ghostbusters still fell short of box office expectations. The movie made a worldwide gross of $230 million on a $144 million budget. Generally, it's expected that a movie needs to earn twice its production budget to turn a profit, because of the cost of advertising. Considering tie-ins with Papa John's and Twinkies, and the production of toys and other products, it's pretty clear that $288 million is a more than generous estimate for a total cost, and thus, the movie fell well short of expectations. Not to mention, the film's failure led to the cancellation of Sony's planned sequels. Why did Lady Ghostbusters fail? Well, the simple fact is that despite being incredibly loud, both sides of the division are much smaller than one would think. Many Ghostbusters fans decided not to go see the movie rather than hate watch it. And either not enough socially conscious moviegoers were inspired by the call of supporting feminism, or not enough existed in the first place. This leaves you with one remaining demographic, which is people that don't particularly care about Ghostbusters. Maybe they saw the original movie and liked it. Maybe they don't even know what Ghostbusters is. The reviews for the movie were middling at best. The best reviews I ever saw for the movie were along the lines of, "It's not that bad," or "It certainly wasn't worth all the controversy it caused." The onus was on the producers to create a movie which would attract general audiences, and an abysmal trailer, conversations about diversity, and the sterling name of femdom fetishist Paul Feig were not going to ever be enough to put butts in seats for a fundamentally crap movie. So why then do movies like the Marvel films and Star Wars do so well? Could the outrage narrative be working in their favor? Well, in terms of Marvel, I would say that Marvel Studios doesn't actually make that much use of the outrage marketing. There are stories here and there to drum up headlines. Black Widow needs her own movie, Stark and Banner should be gay for each other, Captain America and the Winter Soldier should be gay for each other, Rocket and Groot should be gay for each other, and things like that. But to my knowledge, there's never been anything that's led to them attacking their own fans or their detractors going on a boycott. I remember some controversy during Spider-Man Homecoming about MJ and Flash having their races changed, but nothing crazy. Black Panther is the only time I've seen a real outrage situation, and even then, outside of the Rotten Tomatoes situation, I don't think it ever got too bad. Sure, there's still tons of people acting like Wakanda is a real place, debating the pros and cons of colonization, or trying to claim Wakanda as an alt-right ethno-state and blah blah blah, but those people will always be there. Especially when Marvel Studios bears the stigma of being related to Marvel Comics. I think things with Black Panther stayed fairly mild because of one main reason. Black Panther was good. Not great, not outstanding, not the best Marvel movie ever, as some people might try to convince you, but it was a decent movie. It's just as good as any other Marvel movie that's come out in the last few years. Without overwhelming hate and criticism directed at the movie for being shit, there's no reason to use the shield of diversity. The actual racists are separated from the people who just thought the CGI looked like a PS2 game, and the backlash stays relatively small. The limited use of outrage marketing that Marvel Studios does use fails to harm their image in my eyes because it doesn't seem like they're directly attacking their fans. Coupled with the fact that their movies are actually good, it stands to reason that they would stay successful. The Last Jedi, on the other hand, is sort of the exact opposite. Like the Marvel films, The Last Jedi was a financial success. Not as much as The Force Awakens, but still one of the biggest box office successes in history. But The Last Jedi has received a huge backlash from the fans. There are people who have built entire YouTube channels based on hating The Last Jedi. Defenses for The Last Jedi are woven into articles about Solo. Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams still make comments about man-baby fans being afraid of women and how they don't want Star Wars to be for everyone. Why are they still responding? Why are they attacking the fans still? Why are fans still angry? Why is there a petition to remake the movie? Well, this is the danger that comes from using outrage marketing as a tactic. The outrage is all well and good when your movie is on the way and when it's in theaters. It might even help with Blu-ray sales. But eventually there comes a time when the outrage stops being beneficial for the movie. Usually people forget about it and move on to something else to be upset about. But Star Wars has the issue of never going away. There's a new Star Wars movie every year, and Solo didn't even take 6 whole months to come out after The Last Jedi. Add in the fervent dedication of Star Wars fans, and you've got a heated conversation that will never die down. The Shield of Diversity painted every Last Jedi hater as a racist and a sexist. Someone who couldn't handle a strong female lead, or a strong black lead, or a strong Asian character, or a strong purple-haired female superior officer who makes horrible decisions that get half the good guys killed. This refusal to accept criticism has forced Lucasfilm to double down time and time again. This has turned out to be them digging their own graves because their refusal to acknowledge the failings of The Last Jedi has 2 results. First, they lost the general audience. The Last Jedi is a downer movie that's really not very good. It's well shot and the effects look pretty, but the story fails to expand upon the universe put forth in The Force Awakens. It fails to create any investment in the new characters. It literally removes any interesting aspect of Rey as a character. It removes old characters that casual fans would like and recognize. I mean, I know Carrie Fisher was out of their hands, but still. They followed up the movie with a standalone film about Han Solo, which had a ton of reported issues during production, including changing directors, reshoots, and a lead actor who needed an acting coach on set. We can see from the comparatively small box office of Rogue One that audiences have less of an interest in spin-off films than they do in the mainline Star Wars series. The primary audience for Solo was going to be the fans. The very same fans, half of which have been getting shit on by Lucasfilm for the last few months. So what do? Well, it seems like many of them, like me, didn't go see Solo. I've actually heard it's okay from several people, and I even have one friend that loves it. So maybe I'll check it out when it comes out on Netflix or something, but I made a conscious decision that I would not give Disney my money. I think a lot of others may have made the same decision. Lucasfilm is feeling the effects of attacking their own fan base. The failure of Solo has called into question later standalone films, and it's even looking like Kathleen Kennedy might step down from her leadership role. And yet, Lucasfilm doesn't seem to be using Outrage marketing for Solo itself. Save for the whole Lando is pansexual and the first female droid, I saw far less baiting before the movie came out, and there have not been as vehement attempts to defend the movie and defame its haters. Why is this? I don't really know. It could be that Lucasfilm is starting to see the error of their ways. It could be that the movie itself wasn't that bad, so there's less legitimate criticism to deflect. Or maybe people just sort of checked out. I know I did. Star Wars and Marvel have the benefit of being franchises with massive install bases. Marvel Studios certainly had to work for it, but both series were, at least last year, at a point where they could put out any movie with diverse characters in the main roles of the film, then claim that diversity sells because the movie went on to make $1 billion, even though it would have made as much on brand name alone with almost any competent actor. I maintain that The Force Awakens could have been an hour and a half of Jar Jar standing on Naboo farting, and it still would have broken box office records. I really don't think the vast majority of audiences or fans have a problem with minority characters, or progressive ideas being the focus in movies, but creating false outrages pushes people away. It forces people to take a side and see others who aren't with them as enemies. Someone who dislikes something for completely separate reasons gets a target painted on them, and then finds that a side has been chosen for them, even if they don't like the people they've been sided with. Outrage marketing can certainly function to get attention, and while it might piss some people off, if your movie is actually good, it could help in the long run. I personally think Black Panther would not have done nearly as well if it weren't for the media controversy and the black empowerment narrative leading schools to literally pay for students to go see it. But when it's used to mask the faults of an obviously bad piece of media, all it does is drive people away, and your constant crying wolf keeps people from ever wanting to come back. So how does this relate to anime? Well, this part of the video will probably be fairly short, because as of now at least, I don't see it as being much of a problem. Yet. I will admit that I may be somewhat out of the loop on this one, mainly because I don't really follow any news sources directed towards anime or anime subculture. Anime is much smaller in the world of media, and while it's growing, it's still a ways off for movies, Western TV, and video games in terms of mainstream attention. So the number of media outlets covering anime, and the quality of them, has never been enough for me to want to pay attention. So what role could outrage marketing play in anime? Outrage marketing is done in an attempt to get more attention to a property. It's a tactic to increase the profitability of something. In this way, the disconnect between Japan and the US acts as a sort of buffer. The relationship between journalists who would write about anime and those who would write about film and video games to their sources is vastly different. Movie critics get to go to premieres, video game critics get to go to E3 and be given free Xbox 360s.
Will be available in stores later this week. Unless you are here in the audience at the Wiltern Theater, in which case we're shipping the new Xbox 360 to you right now on us.
But anime reviewers just get to have the companies and most of the fans ignore them. Language barrier aside, even if Western journalists were interested in shilling for anime studios, the studios wouldn't care because their concern is not in the foreign market. The foreign market has had an impact on the anime industry for a while now, and that impact is only getting stronger with every year, with services like Crunchyroll and Western networks like Adult Swim getting into the production side of things. But by and large, the anime industry is still primarily motivated by the Japanese consumer base. And this generally means either appealing to young teenagers with shonen or shoujo series, or using ecchi comedies and moe shit to hook older otakus and make money off cast-off figurines and DVDs. I'd be willing to bet that most Crunchyroll subscribers aren't buying hundreds of dollars of Blu-rays to see their waifu in glorious HD. Despite this mentality, foreign licensing is a rapidly growing revenue source for anime studios. There's a pretty sizable disconnect between the access of anime-related materials in the West and access in Japan. Every single convenience store in Japan has dozens of different comic books, with new ones coming out every week. Pop-up shops sell merchandise that most Westerners would have to import, and there's plenty of hobby shops with all kinds of figurines from Gundams to character figs. The market is just so much more accessible, and so much more direct in its subsidizing of merchandise and manga within Japan that, at least for now, the West does not compete. But manga and merchandise don't necessarily translate into money at all for animation studios. This makes bids for international licensing more and more attractive to anime studios as a primary source of income as the Western market continues to grow. Japan doesn't need to pander to the West, and they don't need Western journalists to stoke controversy about their new anime coming out because they don't view the West as being where the money is. Yet. Japan doesn't care about most of the progressive ideals that hold so much sway in the West. Anime does not have diverse casts because the Japanese don't expect anime to reflect the racial demography of America or the West. They expect it to align with the makeup of Japan. Maybe they'll throw in the odd American or Canadian foreign exchange student, or deal with the CIA, or even encounter a black Russian. But for the most part, 98.5% of anime characters are Japanese, because 98.5% of people in Japan are Japanese. There are, of course, exceptions. Obviously, an eclectic group of foreigners traveling through the Middle East will not see many Japanese folks. But you can be certain that each and every one of those Egyptians speaks perfect Japanese, goddammit. When it comes to ideas about feminism, that too is something that Japan does not share Western views on. Women in Japan are part of the workforce, but there are still expectations regarding marriage, taking care of children, and a woman's role in society, although these are slowly changing. Japanese women are far from marching bare-chested in the street, wearing pussy hats and complaining about manspreading, but they do see themselves as being equal to men and deserving all of the rights and privileges that entails. In spite of this, I would actually argue that anime does a much better job with the number of female characters and actually having strong female characters in both a physical and emotional sense. Although the sexualization of those characters usually stops them from being celebrated by the kind of people who are into the whole representation thing. Homosexuality is still a bit of a taboo subject in Japan. While legal protections for gays and transsexual individuals do exist, gay marriage is not legal. The Japanese are less open about their own personal sexuality and not nearly as open as LGBT individuals in the West. Again, despite this, homosexual relationships are probably more heavily represented in anime and manga than most other forms of media, despite some of these representations not being as forward-thinking as progressives would probably like. In a way, the West is to anime as China is to American cinema, an ever-growing audience whose influence is slowly building pressure on the industry. For now, however, Japan is not anywhere near as inclined as the West to create diverse, progressive content. From their own cultural standpoint, and in regards to needing a larger audience, anime seems to be doing just fine in the West, with all of its violence and sexuality intact. But this may not go untouched forever. Western sensibilities do have a way to influence and change anime, and they can do this without the involvement of the Japanese. Censorship has always been common with works being brought over from Japan, changing rice balls into jelly donuts, making cigarettes into lollipops, and even having two cousins with a very uncomfortably close relationship to each other. Now, I'm not someone who is 100% opposed to small changes in a dub. In fact, my favorite anime is Yu Yu Hakusho, a series with what I consider to be one of the best dubs out there, despite playing fast and loose with the specifics of the original script. At worst, a dub can basically be a separate experience from the sub, something that you would have to watch separately to get the two completely different dimensions of the show. But removing violence, drugs, and sexuality from a cartoon intended for children is completely different from changing elements of a show intended for an older audience. Not to mention changes that push an agenda and have nothing to do with the original content.
Oh, pump the brakes, Arthur Fonzarelli. Have you got a stick up your ass? Or are you one of those dumbass Gamergate creep shows?
You're, what?
Check out the balls on this kid! Come in here and lecture me, you dickless cuck!
Boss?
Book day's been canceled, you guys. Another win for you SJW millennials.
What are you wearing that for?
Oh, those pesky patriarchal societal demands were getting on my nerves, so I changed clothes.
Give it a week, they'll be begging you to change back.
Huh?
Each of these examples were changes to the script that had nothing to do with the original dialogue and completely changed the meaning of what the characters say. Changes like this often get explained away as being localizing cultural references, but is it really localization if you change the motivations of the character? Changing a line from being about needing to use more polite speech with someone because they're your senior into calling them a woman-hating Gamergater ascribes a new worldview to the character. Changing a line about covering up because it was making other people uncomfortable into a line about the patriarchy also changes a character's worldview and makes them seem a lot more passive-aggressive. The Hajime Te no Gal change is probably the least egregious, because despite the original line making no reference to cucks, SJWs, or millennials, obviously, it takes place in a dub already fraught with changes and localized cultural references that makes it fall more into the category I mentioned earlier of being pretty much a separate experience from the sub version of the show. Not that anyone would want to watch this show twice to get both experiences. Make no mistake, there was a backlash over all three of these changes, and at the very least, in the case of the prison school line, it resulted in the line being changed for the Blu-ray release. But the backlash never took on the form of Hollywood-style outrage, and this really comes down to two major reasons. The first is the relationship between Western dubbing companies and their fans. The small size of the anime industry and the dedication of its fan base creates a close relationship the likes of which has never been seen in Hollywood. Huge voice actors will make time to travel to anime conventions and answer questions from their fans. They'll do line requests, they'll sign autographs. Most of the members of the industry are active on Twitter and will generally listen to their fans because their audience is relatively small and it's not guaranteed. In either case, the lack of a same-thinking wall of media to call the fans basement-dwelling losers for hating a show keeps the outrage reaction from having all of its reagents. On top of this, the language barrier between fans and the industry itself makes communication and therefore harassment very difficult. Hundreds of people sending a mangaka pictures of their dicks is one thing, but a sustained and targeted harassment campaign is difficult to keep going when you need every tweet to go through Google Translate. The second, and I think much more important reason outrage marketing hasn't taken hold in this case, is the difference between Hollywood and anime between the number of companies present and the properties they control. Funimation is a juggernaut of the anime industry, and to illustrate that point, each one of these example shows was dubbed by Funimation. The anime industry is one in which groups like Crunchyroll will make a bid for international licensing on literally every single show that comes out in Japan in a season. In an environment like this, does a company really care if one show does poorly? It's a sort of understanding within anime fans that most of the shows that come out in a season are shit. That's why we have the 3-episode rule. There's so much content you can't waste your time watching something generic and pointless. Compare this to Hollywood's more all the eggs in one basket approach. Movies like The Last Jedi cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're only one of a few movies that come out for a studio each year. If that one movie fails, it's a massive blow to the studio. Maximum damage control is necessary to deflect criticism, and national media attention is a must. Two of these three examples come from shows that are borderline porn. And while Prison School is popular in certain circles, Hajime Te no Gal gets shit on constantly. If Funimation wanted to draw attention to its series and bait harassment so it could paint people who criticize their shows as alt-right trolls who don't like being told that they hate women,
Plus, most of the freaks who come in here hate women, so seeing girls degraded gives them boners and makes them happy.
they probably wouldn't want to do it in a show about a guy who confesses to a girl he thinks is a slut just so she'll take his virginity. A show in which a literal pedophile is one of the MC's best friends. If anything, the people that hate this show would be far more on the other side of the political spectrum. Honestly, for a show like this, I could see the inclusion of these changes being a way for the staff to vent, or cope with working with material that goes pretty strongly against their own personal beliefs. It's likely a swipe at the kind of people that would enjoy Hajime Te no Gal, which in essence is why some people took offense. Honestly, if the question is whether or not Funimation would start a media outrage to boost the sales of Hajime Te no Gal, I think the answer is that they would much rather fans forget they had anything to do with it in the first place. I do not see the issue of outrage marketing becoming an issue in anime so long as Western companies are detached from the actual production of the series. The shotgun approach to localizing every show in a season prevents the few large Western companies from needing to overly promote any one show. While getting involved in the much more costly side of production on a series, and thus dumping buckets of money on a smaller number of series, could change this, and the gap between the two industries is closing, I don't think the cultural divide between what is acceptable and what values are to be evangelized will ever truly be crossed. What worries me more is the demonstration of the ability and the willingness to change existing material, to incorrectly translate dialogue in a series in order to shoehorn in political jokes. In some cases, jokes that specifically attack the intended audience of the series. When the official subs for websites like Crunchyroll are being provided by the same groups, we could start to see issues where the subtitles themselves are incorrectly translated. It's times like this that the effects of the death of fan subbing can really be felt. Troll subs and weebiness aside, the presence of competition in the subbing marketplace ensured that no one group had the kind of power that Crunchyroll and other streaming services have over the medium today. As the Western market continues to grow, and their say gets more important, their power that we've already seen them misuse, will grow. I'm all for diverse casting when the actor in question is right for the part, and I don't mind progressively minded media. But shoehorn politics and the use of women and minority actors as a tool to get attention, as well as a shield against criticism, has aided in the decline of one of the most successful franchises in entertainment history. It has created a justification for attacking fans and contributed to a great divide in some of the biggest fan bases. I don't want to see a future where political messages are shoved into anime by Western companies calling it localization, and where anyone who complains about the practice is called a bigot. But at this point, I don't think there's a way to stop it. All I can do is have faith that glorious Nippon will keep the waters clear at the source.
自分だとやっぱり可愛い女の子とか出てきたりするのを見るのが好きですし、自分で描くのも好きなので、そこのところがアニメは好きです。自分の好きな表情とか髪型とか体型とかそういうのばっかりを描いたりする時もあって、そんな時が楽しいですね、描いてるのが。